So welcome everyone. So today we're going to talk about ODA KVM virtualization. This is our agenda. We're going to talk about the ODA KVM virtualization support on a high level. Then we're going to actually show you the steps of creating an application KVM and a little quick video demo. And then we'll also show you how to create ODA Database KVM and as well as do a quick video demo. Then we'll leave the rest for Q&A, okay? And with me today, we have Carlos. Say hi, Carlos.
Hello, everyone.
Okay, so why virtualization? Just a quick recap. So there are a number of benefits for customers when they want to do virtualization. So the first is consolidation, of course, right? You're consolidating multiple physical machines into virtual machines, then you can put them all in one platform like ODA, right? So that can save you potential capital expenses, as well as better resource utilization, because a lot of time you have a lot of different systems, maybe that they're not completely utilized, right? So with a virtualization, you can also get better utilization. Now, and of course, then you're reducing the number of physical servers and storage. So that's power, cooling, and all these additional saving on top of that. The second benefits of virtualization is really about isolation, right? You can isolate your virtual machines, whether it's database VMs or application VMs. So they have their own logical virtual machines where you can patch them separately. It's not interfering with one another, right? And with that, you have better security, because you have that isolation. And at the same time, when you have isolation, you can also contain, like, for example, CPU resources into the virtual machine, and that will also guarantee you a better level of quality of service as well, right? So that's another benefits of virtualization. And then, of course, we have many of our customers and partners have this approach called solution in a box, where they put application in a VM, middleware in the VM, and the database in the VM, all on the ODA platform. So we have a lot of examples of that. People are doing that with our current technology, the OVM technology, but they can do the same on the KVM technology as well. And for those of you who are new to KVM, what is kernel-based virtual machines? It's actually a fairly mature technology. It's been around in the Linux kernel since 2007. So as you can see, it's more than 13, 14 years old now, right? And it's an open source machine emulation, and also leverages what's built into the Intel Xeon chip, right? So there are some extensions in the chip that help with the performance of the KVM. So those are all good. And then the last bullet is also very important. This is the virtualization technology used in the Oracle Cloud, or the OCI, and not just the Oracle Cloud. It's also used in other public clouds like AWS and Azure. So as we do more things with the cloud from the ODA perspective, it makes it a lot easier, because we're sharing the same underlying technology, right? So that's another benefits of moving to the KVM virtualization technology. So let's look at specifically the ODM KVM virtualization support. On the right-hand side, you can see we have our ODA systems, and with the 1910 release, you can actually put the database in the KVM, the application in the KVM, all on the same platform now. And just for your reference, the name we're going to be using when you go to our graphic user interface or the browser user interface, what you'll see is this thing called compute instance. Basically, that's application KVM. And you can see another tab called database system, which is actually the Oracle Database KVM. Why do we use these terms? Again, this is the terms used on the Oracle Cloud. So we want our customers to be familiarized with that, using those terminologies consistent, on the cloud and on the on-prem engineering system like ODA. And it's not just ODA, if you use Exadata, they use the same terminology. So it's a consistent term, for our whole product line. And let's see. So with the 1910 release, we're actually supporting the hard partitioning with KVM, with the database in KVM. So that's very important for many of our customers been waiting for that. And because as we move from Oracle VM to KVM, for the first time, with KVM, we can also do hard partitioning database license with the KVM now. And in 1909, we introduced this concept of CPU pools, and I'll talk about that later in the later slides. That's used with the KVM, but the CPU pool themselves is really has nothing to do with the license. So we want to make sure that's clear. So the technology that allow you to do hard partitioning is KVM. CPUs is a tool for you to sort of manage the CPU resources. So just keep that in mind. And then, of course, everything's going to be integrated with ODA. So we can use the ODA command line, the ODA CLI, as well as our browser user interface to do all the KVM life cycle management, as well as making things a lot easier to do anything you want with the application and the database KVM. And that's what our demo is going to show. And then because our unique architecture, the share everything architecture, that we can, with this built-in infrastructure, we can do things that can help the application VM with higher availability through automatic restart and failover. Again, so on the HA model, you have a node that fails. It will automatically fail the application KVM to the other node. So those things, we'll talk in a little more details. Carlos, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, yeah, Paul. I just want to emphasize on that the previous to the last point, right? That is very clear for our customers that we support the KVMs, but you can run the database in bare metal and your applications in the KVM, or you can run both, right, on the KVM. It's a common question that we get asked.
Yes, yeah. So, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the later slides that shows the differences. There's some trade-offs, right, doing that. But yeah, we'll get into more details. So here, this is a previous release when we first started supporting KVM, application KVMs in 1909. And then that's when we introduced the concept of CPU pool, right? So let me explain what you're seeing here. So on the left-hand side, you can see we have a couple application KVMs sharing a CPU pool that we created. So that, and then on the right-hand side, we have database in bare metal. And again, on the bare metal database, you can share a CPU pool, and then you can also have a dedicated CPU pool for like the database 4, as you can see. Now, so this is considered a bare metal system, right? Because your database is in bare metal. So with bare metal, you still can sub-license, right? So in this case, we have 32 cores available, but we only activate half of it, 16 cores. Now, of that 16 cores, database are using, as you can see on the right-hand side, 12 cores. And then we have 4 cores used by the application. But because it is on a bare metal, so the bare metal licensing rule applies for our database license. So in this case, because it's bare metal, you still have to license all 16 cores for database, even though some of the cores are used by the application. So this is okay if you have, like a ULAs, unlimited license, or standard edition database that's a socket-based, then also it doesn't matter. But for most of our EE customers, they do have to, basically pay for the database license for the application, which may not be what they want. So on the current release, the older 1910 that came out a few weeks ago, what we do now is support the database as well as the application in KVM, right? So in this case, all the cores are activated because the database are in KVM. So you only have to license Oracle Database for the cores used in the database KVMs, right? So on the right-hand side, we have 2 database, and we call it the database systems, right? 1 and 2. And as you'll see in the demo and the other slides, it's very easy to create a database KVMs now, because we automatically assign a CPU pool for that database. And again, you only have to license the cores using the database KVMs. So you can have all the other cores available to you for applications, right? And so that's kind of the benefits of putting Oracle database in KVM or creating DB systems. Okay, now, and we'll go through the steps of setting up the application KVMs as well as the database system, database KVMs. Now, with 1910, this is our first release, so there are some limitations, right? That's what the last bullet is, right? So we can create, basically provision the database KVMs, but and we can delete the database KVMs. However, to modify and some of the other integration work that's been done for the next release that's going to come out basically end of next month, the 1911. Let's see. But the benefits of the current implementation is that with database and KVMs, you can do the hard partitioning license. So in this case, you only have to license 12 cores, even though you're using maybe 20 cores here, right? Because some of them are used by the applications. Carlos, you have anything to add on this?
Yes, I want to add, right, that even though today we support the delete function, there is an intermediate manual step that you need to do. That's why we highlighted the delete here. That is coming. The full functionality is coming in phase 2, right? It's setting up data guard and backup and restore also for those databases in the DBVMs or the database system, right? That's also coming in the next one. And the virtual network, today there is a default virtual network that is created, and that's the only one that you can use. With 1911 or with the next version, right? You're going to be able to create additional virtual networks. And one thing that I want to emphasize, because we get a lot of questions on this, right? If you notice on the illustration for the DB system 1, for example, see how the CPU pool, right? These are cores 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They are encapsulated within the same box as the database. And so what happens when you create it is the system automatically creates the CPU pool based on the Oracle database shape that you use, right? I'm going to go back to the previous slide, right, to just show that on the bare metal of the VM CPU pool, as you're going to see in the demo, you define it, right? You create it. But on the DB system, you can't. And here on the bare metal, when you create your databases in bare metal, then you specify, I want my database 1, 2, and 3 to go to the CPU pool 1. On the DB system, you can't, right? Each database system has its own pool that is based on the Oracle database shape that you chose.
Yeah, but that's changing though. For our next release, we will be able to share the CPU pool. So again, that's an enhancement that we're making for the next release.
Right, 1910 functions this way, right?
Yes.
And the question that we get is, well, why can I just license based on the CPU pool, right? It's as Paul explained, like in this example of the this XA-2M, right? You license all 16. You're using 12 for your database and 4 for your VM, right? And you cannot get to use the other ones.
Right. Now the benefit, yeah, I was just going to mention the benefit is that then you get the bare metal performance, right? So that's the difference, because with a KVM, any virtualization technology, you're going to have some overhead, right? So for people that are very sensitive to performance, then they should keep the database in bare metal, right? So that's another reason for doing that.
Correct.
Right. Whereas with KVM, you have a lot more flexibility, right? Not just from the licensing point of view, but from all those isolation and things I talked about earlier, right? So this is just a review of the architecture and looking at our current, in the last few years, we've been supporting Oracle VM, which is a different type of virtualization technology. And I'll have a comparison coming up where the limitation there was that we could only support one database virtual machine, what we call ODA base. So if you want to do virtualize, first of all, you have to reimage your system, right? So that's a big change. And then you have to put all your databases in this thing called ODA base, right? That big, giant database VM. Now, the limitation also includes, let's say if you have 10 databases in this ODA base, and if you only need one database for rack or real application cluster, you have to license all the cores for rack. And but with KVM, you have that flexibility, right? You only license rack for the database that needs rack. The other ones you can stay single instance. So that's the flexibility of the KVM, and I'll talk about that. And this we've already gone over. So on the left-hand side, you keep the database in bare metal, and but all your applications in the KVM. And on the right-hand side, it's the full virtualized KVM model where you put all the databases and the KVM. Therefore, you can realize the benefits of hot partitioning for the database KVMs. Okay. So here's the summary of the big difference between OVM and KVM. Again, so the blue are the big differences, right? Where the first one is that you don't have to reimage the system anymore. So in fact, you have to have the bare metal ODA deployed before you can create a KVM for database or the database systems. So you don't have to go through the reimaging process when you want to virtualize. And then we have browser user interface support that's not available on OVM. And then of course you can run multiple database VMs now, whereas on OVM you only have one database VM. And then finally the OVM was only available on our HA model, whereas KVM is available to all the ODA models now, right? Including the single node, the S and the M models. Okay. So this is just a quick view to show you the HA capability that's provided by our HA system that comes pretty much automatic, right? In this example, we have 3 different application VMs, 2 on node 1, node 0, and 1 on node 1. And then we also have a rack database KVM and a standard edition database VM running on node 0. And because everything's sitting on the shared storage on the HA system, so we have this built-in HA capabilities for our application KVMs. So in case a application fails, you can set it up so that it automatically restart on the same node. And then if the whole system, the node 0 fails, because the application KVM is sitting on the shared storage, you can set it up so that it automatically fails over to the other node. So again, because we can do this because the shared everything architecture. Now, what about the database, right? Now the database is automatically protected by the real application cluster already. So you see that dark green one, the rack database KVM, that automatically fails over when the node goes down, right? Because that's what rack does, and it does very fast and very efficiently. Now for the standard edition database on the light green one, currently the standard edition does not support real application cluster anymore. But we have this built-in failover feature called standard edition database high availability, right? So that's automatically gets implemented. So again, for the standard edition database, you also get the benefits that fail over automatically with our ODA HA system. Okay, so at this point, we can get to the demo part. And before we start the video, I just want to show you the steps. As you can see, if you have to do this in Linux, right, it involves a lot more steps. But we automate the whole the KVM lifecycle management for you with ODA commands now, right? So conceptually, you just have to do a few things, right? So first, you create a CPU pool for your application KVM. But this is an optional step, right? But you could do that if you want to dedicate CPU pool for the application. You can do that. But again, this is the step 1 is optional for application KVMs. Step 2 is you create a virtual storage, including virtual disks for your application KVM. And then step 3, then you create a virtual network for the application KVM. And then of course you also need a ISO image, right? Whether it's a Linux operating system or Windows operating system to create the application KVM. This is the guest operating system for your application KVM. So you need that to create the application KVM. And then after you've done that, all you have to do is then go into the application KVM, install whatever application you want, whether it's Linux or Windows applications into the application KVM. And then of course you can modify the KVM, and then you can delete the application KVM. So that's kind of conceptually the application KVM lifecycle management. Now, Carlos, are you ready to do a quick Windows demo and describe the process?
Certainly, let's go ahead and do it. Okay, so let's start. Right, it's we're already logged into the Oracle Database Appliance here, right? And the first step, as Paul pointed out, we're going to create the CPU pool. Is optional, right? So here's the CPU pool. There's already one created there, so we're going to call it pool 2. And remember, you got to choose if it's going to be a bare metal for your databases or VM. Specify the number of CPU cores. In this case, is 8. Right? Look at the status, and it's very fast. So it's just created it already, right? And you can see there the CPU pool, pool 2. Right? From there, we go to the compute instance. We go to the VM storage, right? There's already one, but we're going to create another one, right? VM storage 2. Specify the size, in this case, 50. Now you saw the data and record disk groups. Obviously, you can pick whatever, but the default or the typical is going to be data, right? Check the status, give it a few seconds, and you can see all the steps that it's doing, and now it was created. To get an idea, right, this video is running at 2x speed, so it's fairly fast. From there, you go and create the virtual disk, right? It's so this 2 specify the storage, the VM storage that we just created, which is the 2, right? Specify the size, in this case is 10 gigabyte. And again, right, it's give it a few seconds. And it's going to be, right, success. You can see it right there on the success. Then after that, right, you go to the virtual network, as I indicated, right? This is created by default, and the one that we support with 1910. In the next version, you're going to be able to just create more. And then once that's done, right, on the VM instance tab, you come in and just create your application KVM, give it a name, specify the storage name. Now, here is the source installation that Paul was talking about, right? If KVM supports the Linux or Windows, in this case, I'm going to show, right, we already preloaded this image that you see here, right, the Linux. That was the path. You specify your path. There are other parameters that are optional, so we're going to skip those. And in this case, right, we select what is the pool, the CPU pool that we want to use. In this case, is the 2. And then you specify for your KVM, right, how many virtual CPUs you want. And you get 2 numbers. Here, you can see that is the maximum number of vCPUs that this KVM can use. And right underneath, the number of vCPUs to use is going to be the typical, right, that number of vCPUs that is going to be using. And you do the same for the memory, right? 32 is the max, 16 is the typical. Select your virtual disk, right? Virtual network.
Hey, Carlos, I just wanted to mention a couple of things here. So on the CPU pool, notice is a vCPU. So that's actually the virtualization terminology. So remember when we created the CPU pool, we say it was 8, right? So vCPU is basically twice as many of that. So virtual CPU, which is like a thread of a core. So that's why, you just want to point out that, the difference between the CPU core and the vCPU. So for every CPU core, you basically multiply that by 2. Right, so you have 8 core, so you have 16 vCPUs available to you, right?
That's a good point, right? Yeah. It's we have 2 threads per core, and each vCPU equals a thread. Yeah. So in this case, yes, the 16 equals 8 physical core CPU,
right?
Which is what you're going to be using for the licensing.
Right. Now, the other thing I want to mention is the 3 storage types, right? I think that's also confusing sometimes for people that are new to this. So the VM storage is basically a pool of storage that could be used for multiple VM instance. Okay, so that's the first storage. Then we have the vdisk, and think of it as a data disk, right, for your VM instance, and that could be shared by multiple VMs, application VM as well. So that's a data disk. Then you have this thing called VM disk here on the right hand side that we're putting 10 gigabyte on, and that's basically a boot disk, right? That's where your ISO image is installed on, right? So so just want to make sure there's 3 different types of storage so that they know what those type of storages are. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And so you create it and you'll see, right, go to the status and it's done already. So it's very fast to create. And I mean, now there's your application KVM, VM2, you click on it and you can see the different parameters, right? First, the status configuration. And at the bottom, you see, if you see at the bottom the VM configuration, there's a live and a config, right? The live is what is running, and the config right now is exactly the same, but you can actually go and make some changes, but again, with the next version of the software, right? When you can make changes, it'll reflect here, but they're not going to be activated until the next reboot, right? And so some networking information that we're going to be using in the next video, right? But this is it. So you can see that it's fairly quick to create application KVM. Now, in the next step, we want to show you, well, how do you connect to the application KVM, right? And so once you go to the X8, in this case, is the X8, right? The user guide, right? So you go to this step here, managing KVM, right? And there's a managing VMs. So creating a virtual machine, that's what we went through. And then there is this section, connecting to the VM instance using VNC. There's 2 steps, right? Or 2 methods. I'm highlighting the second one right here. We're going to use an SSH tunnel to access the VNC session. And that's what we're going to show in this demo. But the previous bullet, right? If you have a separate server with X Windows systems, you can do that as well. But for the demo, we're going to use the second method, right? And so for Linux and Mac OS, or for Windows, right, using PuTTY. So we're going to be using the Mac here, and you can see the command, right? The SSH to that local port, and the local port, right, is going to be 1024 are usually reserved, so you're going to use something that is higher, right? For example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In the example, I'll show you that we're going to use something similar, right? And then the local host at the VNC port. I highlighted that when we created the application KVM, but I'll show you the location where it is. Okay, it's that VNC port. So here, let's go back to the machine again and go to the compute instance, right here, the VM2, and see right there where it says display port, right? The local host is this internal IP address. It's a private IP address, 127.0.0.1, but we'll just use local host instead of specifying the IP address. And the .2 is the port, right? This you need this, and I'll explain right here. So you can see the VNC port, the default is 5900. So that the number 2 that you saw on the KVM, we're going to need to add it to this 5900. So it'll be 5902, as I'll specify. And then just you're going to log into that one. So here's the example, right? And hold on. Sorry, the Zoom window was, but take a look right there, right? So localhost, notice that I'm saying 5902. So it's the 5900 plus the value of that port in the virtual machine, which is 2, right? For this case, it could be 1, 3, something else. And here I'm just going back to show you what I highlighted before, right? That the VNC port, you have to add it to the 5900, right? Then in this case, I've root to that testing machine, enter the password, right? Then go to your VNC viewer. I mean, it's a free download, right? Run it.
Yeah.
And now that's
you're doing this from your Mac now, right?
Yes, this is a Mac system, right? Then you just enter the port number that you use, right? In this case, I use the 12334. So it goes to the local host, right? And right there, right? So we used a Linux image, and now we connect it to that application KVM. And here is Linux just waiting for us to continue with the setup, right? Now, remember that Paul mentioned, this is like a black box type KVM, right? We manage the KVM for you. We create it, eventually modify it, etc. But what you put in there, what application, then it's up to you, right? You're gonna manage that one.
Yeah, and this is just the beginning, right? So this is as if you were configuring a new Linux box. So you will still have to, once this installation finishes, you still have to go in there and configure the network configuration files to assign the static IP address to this KVM, so that then you can actually then SSH into it and do the application installs and so forth, right? So I don't think we're showing that, but I just wanted to say that this is how we can use VNC to connect it to the application KVM, and this is just the beginning process of imaging that application KVM with the Linux 7 operating system. But once that's done, then you still have to SSH into this to assign all the static IP addresses, right? And with a netmask and the gateway and so forth, right? And that's just a standard Linux network configuration effort. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. So that was the application KVM. So go ahead, Paul.
Oh yeah. So as you can see, we did most of our setup in the browser user interface, but you can do everything through the command line as well. So these are the command line equivalent, right? So create CPU pools, VM storage, vdisk. So everything you can do in the browser user interface, you can do it through command line as well. Obviously, point and click is a lot easier. As you can see, it's a very simple process. So with the database KVM, it's actually even simpler than the application KVM because we, again, automate a lot of the things now, right? So with database KVM, what you need to do is download a template first, right? So you want to download the database system template and KVM template, right? And with 1910, we only support 1910 database. I think I don't know if I mentioned that earlier. So currently, we only support one version of the database in the database KVM, and in the future we'll support additional ones. But for now, it's just 1910. Now, this is a new step, right? This is the same thing. If you're familiar with the process, that's downloading a clone file for bare metal database. If you want to create new databases, right? Now after you downloaded this file, put it in the ODA. Then you need to update the repository. Again, similar to what we do with our clone files, what the update repository does, it registered this file, this database VM template with ODA, so ODA knows about it. And then with that, then you can create database systems or database KVMs from the template, right? So you can create multiple database systems from this one template. And then of course, to manage the database KVM lifecycle, you need to be able to modify. So that's coming in the next release, as Carlos stated earlier. And then, of course, you can then delete the database systems, right? You can do that with 1910, but it's just more of a manual process. And we're going to automate that in the 1911. And of course, we do have all these in our current documentation, so you can see how you can do that manually in our documentation. Again, very simple, very quick to create database KVMs, and you'll see in the video demo. So let's go to that, Carlos.
So in the first step, right, we're going to show you how you download the template. Right, you can just Google order release notes 1910. It'll take you to that document, right? And so go to the main book for your model. In this case, right, we're going to the X8-2, right? Go to that chapter 14 and managing database systems in KVM deployment. And right here, right, creating a database system. So right there, something that Paul highlighted before, right? You're gonna go through the normal steps. So the bare metal configuration needs to be deployed first. And once you do that, right, then here are the steps that you're gonna follow. This is the template, right, that Paul mentioned. There is a patch number, and I'm gonna show you next where you get that from, right? Again, go to the release notes documentation. That's the release notes link right here, right? So click on it, and that option 3 is the patches. Select the model number. In this case, I'm selecting the X8. And right here, this table gives you all the files that are applicable for that model, right? And the last item that you see here, that's the KVM database system template, right? Click on it, you download it, right? And then once you download it, right, you just follow this step to unzip it, and then the step to update the repository, right, with that new image. So that's the first step that you need to do, right? So once that is done, then we go to creating a DB system, right? Log in. So that's the home page. Click on the DB system tab, create the database system, right? It's I mean, the choose file, we also support a JSON file that you can just upload with the configuration, or just enter the configuration, right? So here we're just entering the name, the domain name, select this group for the VM storage, your region, put in the password. And after the password, you can see here that there's a networking configuration, the DNS, the NTP, and the networking. Network configuration, right? Node name, IP address, etc. So that's very specific for your own configuration. So I'm not going to show you that. I'll just skip through it, right? But you enter that information. Then you get to this. It's a similar setup as you create your databases, right? The user and group selection. I'll just keep it as default. Then you specify your database information. As Paul mentioned, you can see here on the drop down, there's only one version, 1910. Right, you specify if you want pluggable database. So I just said no for the moment. Select your shape. The minimum is the 2-core 16 GB memory that we support today, right? So I'll select that one. Your database class. Enter your password. Finish setting up those parameters if you want TDE.
Yeah, so one comment I want to make here is that, as you can see, if you're familiar with deploying the bare metal ODA system and creating database with the bare metal user interface, this is very similar to the bare metal deployment and the database creation. So we're making it very easy and simple. So it's very seamless, even though you're creating actually a database in KVM called DB systems, but the whole experience is very similar to as you create a bare metal system too, and the database in bare metal.
Right. And okay, so once you enter, right, create create it, it'll give you the status. Go there, and it will take some time, right? Because here we're creating not only the DB system but the database as well. Right, here we were running it on a single node, so it took us around 40 minutes, right, for everything. And once it's done, there it is, right? The database system. You click on it, you can see the system information, the database system information, the different parameters, right? Notice here on the CPU pool, right? The number of cores is 2. That's what I selected, but that's what is required for the licensing. But when we were talking about the virtual CPUs, if you look at this line here that says online CPUs, right, is counting the virtual CPUs, right? So there's 4 which map to 2 cores, right? So that's what it is, and other parameters here. You can go and take a look at the database information and the different parameters that you set up, and the network information, which I skipped, right? And then here, I mean, this is the task, right, that created the DB system. I just wanted to show you all the different steps that we automatically do, right, for that. And I mean, that's it. That's how you create a database system. But very important, right? It's, as Paul mentioned, this is the first release of the database system. There are some tasks that are going to be completed on the next release. So feel free to just go and play with this. But the next release it'll have the complete implementation. Paul?
Yeah, let's go back to the slides. I think there are a couple other slides we can go over.
Yeah.
So again, here we can do everything we show you on the browser user interface in the command line as well. So these are the new DB system commands to support the database KVM or DB systems. Okay. So again, everything you can do on browser user interface, you can do it through the command line. Next slide. So here, I just want to point out, we did publish a blog on, we know there are a lot of questions on the new KVM and DB systems. And so we create a FAQ, and we already got some additional ones that we're going to have to add to it as people start using it, and they're getting more questions in. So we'll update that.
And Paul, I just want to show here, right? Just go to Google, type ODA blogs, it'll take you there, and it's going, and right here you can just see that first blog. Yeah. Right. There's 3 sections, multiple questions. Feel free to look at it. Comment at the bottom if you want to see anything else. Yeah. Yeah. So go ahead. So then of course, as Carlo showed you earlier, there's a lot of information on documentation in the release note. So that's also available now. And I think that's it. And I think we can move on to the Q&A section, the next slide. Yes, and I saw some questions. So thank you, Prasad and Ben. Right, they've been answering questions on the Q&A. Okay. I see some chat. Prasad, any questions that you saw on?
Yeah, we answered all the questions that were there on the Q&A panel. But people are welcome to ask any questions directly as well. Yeah. Okay. If you don't have any questions, and if some questions come up later on, I mean, you have our contact information. Paul and I, send it to us, and we'll talk to our development team. Prasad here, thank you for joining. He's the vice president of the ODA software development team, and Ben is the software architect. So thank you. And I don't see any questions, Paul. So I guess we can call it a day. Yeah. So all right. Okay. Thanks for attending, everyone.